I was not looking for Cahokia, I was tracing something else, the proportions of buildings in the Mississippi Valley that seemed scaled for a different kind of city than the one surrounding them. The mound appeared in the background of a land survey document, not labelled, not explained, just there, rising from a flat field outside what is now St. Louis, taller than anything built by the people who filed the survey. Before America had a flag, this place already had a skyline. An old man lies near death. His family gathers close. If this was the largest city north of Mexico, why do most Americans never learn its name? I was not looking for this city. I was tracing something else, the proportions of civic structures in the upper Mississippi Valley that seemed calibrated for a population far larger than the settlements that came after them. The mound appeared in the margin of a land survey document from the 1840s. No label, no explanation, just a shape rising from flat ground outside what would become St. Louis, drawn by a surveyor who did not consider it worth annotating. That is the detail I keep returning to. A structure covering more than 5 hectares, standing 30 meters high, the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas according to UNESCO, and the surveyor drew it without a word. Consider the arithmetic. An American born in 1050 who lived to see this city at its height would have watched it hold an estimated 20,000 people. London, at the same moment in history, held roughly the same. That is not a coincidence of scale, that is equivalence. Cahokia was not a large village. It was a medieval city operating in parallel with the cities of Europe and Asia, unknown to them, organized according to entirely different principles, built from a material, earth, that survives differently than stone but no less completely. One of these cities appears in every history textbook, the other almost never does. Before New York was founded, before Philadelphia had a street, before Washington existed as a name on any map, there was already a city beside the Mississippi. It had neighborhoods arranged around a ceremonial center. It had a trade network drawing copper from the Great Lakes, marine shell from the Gulf Coast, galena from the upper river, and finished goods from communities across the continent. Farmers arrived from the floodplain carrying maize. Traders came with materials that had traveled hundreds of miles. Workers moved through organized labor, carrying earth in baskets from borrow pits to the growing platforms of the mounds. Each basket added perhaps a cubic foot of earth to a structure that would eventually contain more fill than the Great Pyramid of Giza contains stone. That is the arithmetic the textbook does not ask you to do. Work it out yourself. A cubic foot per basket. Millions of cubic feet. Each one carried by a person who lived a single life, within a project that outlasted dozens of single lives, toward a summit no one person saw completed from start to finish. This was not primitive. This was sustained, organized, multi-generational effort under central direction, which is what civilization has always looked like. The Grand Plaza stretched across 50 hectares of deliberately leveled ground. Leveling it required more labor than the construction of Monks Mound itself, according to archaeological calculations. The city did not accumulate around an accident of geography. It was designed. It had a center and an orientation, a geometry of sacred space and political authority that organized everything around it. Monks Mound rose at the northern end of the plaza, its flat summit holding the largest structure in the city. From the top, on a clear morning, a person could see the river to the west and the settled world extending in every direction. Cahokia was not forgotten because it was small. It was forgotten because America forgot how large indigenous history really was. The old man remembers it as a living thing, not a site, not a ruin. A city with smoke rising from thousands of hearths at once, a density of human life that soil samples and carbon dating can place in time, but cannot reconstruct in texture. He tells his grandchildren what the plaza sounded like on a ceremony day. It was not quiet. It was never quiet. It was the particular noise of a crowd that had gathered because gathering itself was the ceremony, because the space existed to fill, because that is what a city is before it becomes an archaeological category. His grandchildren know the mounds as shapes in the grass. They have walked past them. They have not been given a reason to stop. What the mounds were, he begins to tell them, was never simple. There is a question nobody has answered to his satisfaction. Why does a city built from earth leave so much less of a mark on the American imagination than a city built from stone? Monks Mound is still taller than a 10-story building. Most Americans who live within a day's drive have never heard its name. He does not have an explanation for that. He has only the memory of what the mounds meant when they were still surrounded by the city that built them. The posts were cedar, set in circles at the western edge of the site. The Illinois Historic Preservation Division identifies this structure as Woodhenge, large post circles aligned to mark the sunrise at key points in the seasonal calendar. On the morning of the spring equinox, a person standing at the center post watched the sun rise in precise alignment with a post on the eastern arc. This was not approximate. It required calculation carried across generations, a kind of knowledge encoded into cedar posts placed in exact positions in the earth. The alignment was not the only calculation the city made from its landscape. The mounds themselves were organized according to a geometry that oriented the city toward the cardinal directions, with Monks Mound and the Grand Plaza on a north-south axis, the residential zones arranged outward from the ceremonial core. The Illinois Historic Preservation Division notes that the site preserves many of the original earthen mounds alongside Monks Mound, a reconstructed stockade wall, and Woodhenge, the post circles that tied the city's time to the movement of the sun. The city knew where it stood in space. It knew where it stood in the year. Both of those things were built into the ground. The old man tells his family about the equinox morning. He is not reciting astronomy. He is describing what it felt like to stand at the center post when the light arrived exactly where the calculation said it would. Not approximately, exactly. The sun rose and the shadow fell on the aligned post across the arc, and everyone who had gathered to watch it knew that the city was in right relationship with the year, that the planting season could begin, that the world was proceeding as it should. It felt less like watching a phenomenon and more like receiving confirmation. The world held an order. Cahokia had taken the measure of it and set it in cedar posts in the ground. Each mound meant something different. The platform mounds elevated ceremony and political authority above the level of the crowd, making the position of power visible from across the plaza. The conical mounds held burial and accumulated memory, the weight of the dead made permanent in the earth. The ridge-top mounds traced boundaries between the sacred interior of the city and the territory beyond it, between the center of the known world and the ground that had not yet been organized into meaning. Each mound was a statement. Taken together, they formed a text in a language that had no alphabet, which is why it became so easy to misread them as hills. The palisade reinforced the grammar of that text. A wall of wooden posts enclosed the central precinct, separating the ceremonial core from the surrounding residential neighborhoods. The Illinois Historic Preservation Division notes that a reconstructed stockade wall is among the preserved features of the site. It was not only a defensive structure, it was a line of meaning. There is a center, and you are not in it, and that difference is not accidental. People outside the wall could see Monks Mound rising above the post line. They could hear the ceremonies from the plaza. They could not enter without permission. The wall said what the mound said in a different register. Authority is organized and the structure is intentional. Here is what I keep returning to. A city that aligned its calendrical observatory to the sunrise, enclosed its ceremonial heart with a palisade wall, organized its mounds by function and meaning, sustained multi-generational construction projects across 2 centuries, and drew trade goods from across the continent was not a collection of villages that happened to occupy adjacent land. It was a capital. Cahokia was a city, a calendar, a temple complex, a market, and a capital made from earth. The fact that the earth has survived while the name has not is the core of the problem. What kind of forgetting leaves the pyramid standing and removes only the word? The old man leans forward. He tells his family, "Do not mistake what remains for what there was. The mounds are the least of it. The mounds are only what the earth agreed to hold. What it could not hold was the sound, the smoke, the specific weight of a crowd on a ceremony morning when everyone in the city had gathered in the same direction and the light arrived on time. He has said this before. He says it again anyway. The silence began the way most silences do, not with a single cause that could be mapped and mourned and filed into an explanation. Researchers at UC Berkeley have noted that by the 1400s Cahokia had been abandoned, with possible contributing factors including floods, droughts, resource scarcity and political change, and they are careful to note that this complexity should resist the simple myth of a lost civilization suddenly erased. The city weakened through overlapping pressures that no single season announced. It became quieter generation by generation, the way a room becomes quieter when people leave one at a time rather than all at once. No announcement, no single season of disaster, just absence becoming the new condition of the place. A few houses at the outer residential edges fell empty and were not reoccupied. Grass returned to the pathways between them. Individual families made decisions that looked personal from the outside. A difficult harvest, a relative with more land in another community, a sense that the rains were not arriving the way they once had. And those decisions, made one household at a time, accumulated into something larger than any household had intended. The fires at night became fewer. The darkness between hearths grew wider. The repairs on the palisade stopped, not all at once, but in stages, which is how maintenance stops when the community that built a thing no longer believes in the permanence of what it built. A wall is only as lasting as the people committed to keeping it standing. When enough families had gone, the ones remaining could see that the city they knew was not the city their grandchildren would inherit. The ceremonies became smaller. The plaza held fewer people on the days when it once held thousands. The mound stood unchanged above all of it, precisely because Earth does not decide to leave. Only people do. Here is the sequence, and it does not resolve neatly. The outer neighborhoods emptied first, then the intermediate zones, then the paths between the remaining occupied houses grew grass in the middle where feet had worn them bare for generations. Ceremonies that once required the full plaza contracted into the ceremonial core. The palisade enclosed a center that was shrinking toward its own middle. Each generation inherited a quieter version of what the previous generation had known, and calibrated their expectations accordingly, and did not necessarily experience what they had as loss, because they had no direct memory of the fuller thing. The city did not vanish in one night. It became quieter generation by generation, until the mounds remained and the crowds were gone. That is the more disturbing version. A catastrophe can be mourned, mapped, assigned a cause, and filed into an explanation that makes the loss legible. A slow departure resists all of that. It asks who left first, and why, and what it felt like to tend fires in a plaza built for thousands when only hundreds remained. UC Berkeley researchers warn specifically against the simplified myth of a lost civilization suddenly erased. Cahokia disappeared as a city. Indigenous America did not disappear. The people who left carried their knowledge and ceremonies with them. They settled elsewhere, continued elsewhere, remained part of the larger and unbroken story of indigenous North America. What ended was an urban arrangement. The place lost its skyline. It did not lose its people. The old man knows this. He tells his family, "We were never only the city." Cahokia's builders left no written archive. World History Encyclopedia notes that the people left no written record, which places oral memory and archaeology at the center of everything recoverable about how they lived and what they understood. There is no tablet, no inscription, no document indexed in any catalogue. What survived is what people chose to remember and chose to pass forward through the only channel available, one voice speaking to the next before the opportunity closed. What the elder is doing in this room, his family gathered close around him, is the only archive that ever existed for the things that mattered most. He tells them where the plaza used to be full. He describes the sound of it on a ceremony morning, Not silence, not solemnity, but density, bodies and voices and movement, the specific noise of a crowd that had gathered because gathering was the ceremony and the plaza existed to hold it. He tells them where the post stood that caught the sunrise, how on the equinox morning the light arrived exactly where the calculation had placed it, how that precision felt less like watching a phenomenon and more like receiving confirmation that the world held an order worth understanding. He tells them where the mound tops held power, who stood there, what it meant to everyone who looked up from the plaza below. He tells them where the fires burned at night, how the city from a distance was a field of orange points in the dark, the opposite of the empty field it became. He tells them where the city began to empty, which edges went quiet first, how the silence moved inward slowly across decades until it reached the center. And he tells them why the mounds must not be mistaken for ordinary hills. They are the city's last language. They are the only record that cannot be destroyed by fire, by neglect, by authorized order, or by omission from a textbook. His family does not speak when he finishes. There is nothing to add that would not reduce what he has just placed in the room. They look toward the mound. It is still there. The shape of the city is still in the earth, even though the city is not. Before America had a capital, Cahokia had plazas. Before America had monuments, Cahokia had pyramids of earth. Before America had history books, Cahokia had memory. And when the last man who remembered it spoke to his family, he was not trying to save a city of stone. He was trying to save a city made of earth before it returned to grass. The mound is still there. It was there before the flag and the textbook and the borrowed name that does not belong to it. The shape of what was built remains in the ground, the same way a voice remains in a room after the person who spoke has gone, present in what it changed, not in what it left behind.